Hello and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. In this video, I'd like to briefly discuss and give an overview of the new printing of the canon Hardy Boys stories in their original text form that's being sold through Barnes & Noble primarily here in the US. This is entitled the Hardy Boys Mystery Collection, and it's by Page Classics. And you have this hardcover you see here that contains the first four original texts: The Tower Treasure, The House on the Cliff, The Secret of the Old Mill, and The Missing Chums, by original series ghostwriter Leslie McFarlane, who was responsible for the heart and soul of the series and wrote most of the 26 first books in the canon of original texts before the revision process started in 1959. Now, the early books are now all in the public domain, and every year we get a couple more of the original texts hitting public domain, and we've seen a flood of physical and digital releases of the original text because they're now in the hands of every fly-by-night public domain publisher, and so the quality of the text varies, the quality of the artwork varies wildly, and it's difficult to ascertain that you've got a good edition without typos and mistakes or having the wrong text, as some versions have even mistakenly published the still in copyright revised text version. Dover Thrift Editions did that, for example, with their release of The House on the Cliff. They released the 1959 revised version. So if you look up the stories now, you can find them anywhere. You can read them for free, at least the ones that have entered the public domain. On one hand, this is great because the original texts are now in circulation again, and people can easily access them or get them for free online, whereas before you had to have physical editions from before the revision date of each book, as the books were revised at different times, so some stayed in print longer, but you had to actually have an edition with the original text, and you had to even know about the revision process in the first place, because of course the revised text would keep the same title and the house name of Franklin W. Dixon anyway. Now, the original texts were all substantially longer and had, especially in the McFarlane text, all of the additional world building, rich texture in terms of the characters and the locations and his famous descriptions of what the Hardy Boys ate, but also having a greater sense of the boys thinking for themselves and being a bit more two-fisted and having to rough it in terms of solving cases as junior teenage detectives. And they were being written in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. So there are obviously some dated elements here and there, but nothing to the extent that would have required the Stratemeyer Syndicate to completely rewrite them in the way that they did. Part of the reason why they rewrote them was to remove some dated elements, such as dated vernacular, dated references in terms of technology and vehicles, but also the occasional bits of racial stereotyping that might pop up. But that was on the very minor side. They were also doing it to cut down the page count and make the books cheaper to manufacture and to speed up the pacing a bit at the cost of all the wonderful world building and texture. But they also immediately trimmed back on the boys having an ability to think for themselves, and especially what McFarlane stressed in the early books before he was basically told in no uncertain terms, you should not do this, we don't like where you're going with this. He put in an element that the boys should be able to question authority when called for, that adults or people or any sort of figure in power wasn't always necessarily the right person for the job or had everyone's best intentions at heart. And that's something you definitely get in the early original text, and to some degree it's still there in the later books, but it was one element that the Syndicate requested that McFarlane toned down in no uncertain terms. Other writers came in and wrote other volumes, but McFarlane's voice is really the spirit of the Hardy Boys, and for those among many other reasons, the McFarlane texts are priceless treasures, and it's wonderful that they're now fully in circulation again. I do think McFarlane is one of the most influential writers of the 20th century, as to this day, modern generations still will read the Hardy Boys, and even in the revised text, McFarlane's voice and style is still in there. They rewrote the books, they streamlined them, they cut down on what he put in there, but they couldn't quite eradicate it because his writing voice is the spirit of the Hardy Boys, and these works still remain classics of literature, even though they're juvenile fiction and they're not looked upon by literary critics as anything special. Well, they should be, because McFarlane was a great writer, and he put all of his efforts into these books, even though he was a ghostwriter who was given a basic outline and then had to turn that into a book in a certain amount of time. So these are wonderful books for all ages. If you've never read a Hardy Boys book at all, they're incredible works, and now that you can read them for free, you certainly should. The same goes for the Nancy Drew books, as the original texts are now entering the public domain. It just took a little bit longer because Nancy is just a couple years younger than the Hardy Boys. Now, as I said, you can read the early books that are public domain online, but even getting ebooks, it's hard to find versions with proper formatting or even complete and proper text. And also, they typically don't have the original art or any form of the covers for the books or the front piece artwork. So even with free ebooks and digital versions, you have to check the version you're getting and try to make sure that it's the original full text without a ton of typos or formatting issues. And so having a properly made physical edition is still very important. But there's been a flood of editions across the market in both print and digital, with all sorts of issues, from formatting to incomplete text to having the revised text by accident to being filled with typos and having really horrific artwork, and some of it's AI generated, obviously, because we're in that era now. So all you have to do is a quick Google search to see just a horrifying blend of generic and terrible looking Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew editions for the original texts of the early books that are now public domain. So that brings us to this edition here. This is being currently sold through Barnes & Noble. I think it's on some other online retailers like Amazon, but I think they're just selling extra copies. I think this is primarily a Barnes & Noble release, and you can get it on their website. What's most amazing is that right now, as you can see, it's only $15, which is half off. This is a $30 book, and it's from Page Publications. But as the artwork should already be indicating, this is no mere quick public domain reprint runoff of a cheap book with cheap generic artwork. This has brand new artwork, including a host of internal illustrations of scenes from the book with the same art style. So the artist is Neil King, and he has produced, I think, a rather nice front cover that brings together elements of the early books. And again, this is giving you the first 4 books in a single hardcover volume. And there's also a nice reflective effect on the printing of the flashlight, and everything is actually embossed. So you've got a bit of a nice gold embossing right there. The title's embossed in yellow. You've got a nice dusky blue to suggest night and mystery. You've got the boys being chased on their motorcycles on the bottom. You've got a nice modernized Hardy Boys logo with the boys in a circle to almost give you the feeling of the classic circle spine logo. Got the old mill on the top there. There's even a little bit of some spooky atmosphere. This is really well done, but I was frankly astonished to see this in person and find it's a hardcover with unique new artwork that's lovingly patterned after elements of the books contained within that suggest everything about what makes the Hardy Boys iconic and unique, what makes them special. It's got elements of mystery and adventure, and it's got this wonderful printing. And it's fully embossed. I mean, this is a quality piece of work. And there's even a little leaf design on the spine. So, I mean, they definitely put some effort into this. And even the outer border is reflective. So this will look enticing to kids, but it's also nice to have as a collector's piece. And again, it's only $15. But this continues onto the spine. I really couldn't believe this. So here on the spine, you've got the boys in their famous sleuth, their motorboat tearing across Barmet Bay. You've got the Hardy Boys Mystery Collection. You've got the Franklin W. Dixon ghost name. And this nice illustration, which also has embossing and the reflective quality on the spine. The rear has a nice, spooky, evocative image of the boys going up the stairs. I assume this is the boys ascending the towers of Tower Mansion, owned by the Applegates and the Tower Treasure. Then you've got the contents. You've got a nice blurb that actually tells you what you're getting, tells the importance of the stories, and that these are the original text, first from 1927, credits the artist Neil King, and even has quotes from the Hardys themselves taken from the texts on the back. And again, this has the nice printing and has the reflective quality and even the matching leaf on the spine there. Now, I will say again, this is a hardcover. You're getting all 4 original texts in here, but this is where the cost comes into play. As you can see, it's a straightforward binding, but the actual quality, it's good, but it's obviously a cheaper book. And when you hold it in your hands, the binding isn't exactly super tight. And when you open the book, this is a brand new book, and you can already see, it's obviously cheaper binding. So as long as you're careful, I think you won't have any issues. But again, this is not an archival piece. It's not meant to have super fancy binding. It gets the job done, but you'll just want to be careful in handling this. But I have to say, they really put effort into this overall package, because I didn't expect this to have image end papers like any classic Hardy Boys book should have. This does. What they've done is taken 4 of the images from the internal illustrations and given them this nice sepia or golden tint to give the sort of old-timey flavor. And these are actually printed on a sort of glossy stock, so they have a more premium feel to them and almost are like the glossy paper front piece artworks from original texts. So you've got images from each of the books, and this gives you the style the artist uses for the artwork for the first time. And then nicely, the rear end papers give you 2 more images, and each of the images is taken from each of the 4 books. So you get a nice sepia-tinged moment from all 4 books, which again is not something I expected. I would have thought that they would have been the same across them, but they actually took the time to give us a reproduction of a famous moment from each of the 4 books. We get a new logo page, and we get a basic cover page for each of the books as well. Everything else is pretty straightforward. It's a brand new printing. It was printed in China, and you have the contents with all the 4 books. The only issue here is, for some reason, as you can see, books 3 and 4 have been reversed, so the order in this printing goes 1, 2, 4, 3. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference in terms of series continuity, but if you're reading this, you'll just want to flip to Old Mill after you finish House on the Cliff and then go to Missing Chums. It's not a giant thing. It does happen occasionally in multi-book reprints where they don't keep the order exactly, but that's just one of the quirks of this, is that it flips books 4 and 3. Here's the new cover for Tower Treasure. We get the actual table of contents for each book, which is a nice touch. And then here is the classic opening of the Tower Treasure, Book 1, and right here you can see what the internal illustrations look like, which are very nicely done, full page, and you even have the matching quote to go along with it, like you really should have in a fancy Hardy Boys edition. I think the artwork is actually really well done. It's all black and white inside the book. I think the only issue with the art style is that the boys themselves, their likenesses, it makes them look younger. Sometimes they look like they're between maybe 7 and 10 or 10 to 12, and here it definitely looks a little funky because it looks like they're 12-year-olds on motorcycles going along the shore road. That's more of a minor complaint, but when you go through all of the artwork, you can see that it's going for a consistent style, which it definitely manages, and I think the artwork is very good. It's just that sometimes the boys do look quite a bit younger than they're supposed to be, as in the original text they're about 15 and 16 going into 17. Here in the illustrations, they typically look more like 10 to 12, and sometimes they do look a little bit goofy in terms of their expressions. It basically has a little bit more of a kiddie flavor to it. I think that's partially from the artist style, and that may have been the direction they were ordered to go in. But otherwise, I think the art is really great. And what's lovely is that each of the books has multiple unique artwork pieces that is based directly on moments from the book and things that were never previously illustrated in the originals or other versions. So as you can see here, the text is really nicely laid out. It runs across the whole page, which is oversized as it's a hardcover, and then you get the lovely illustrations inside. They all maintain the same high quality, but again, when you look at the style, it just makes the boys look a little bit kiddish. But that's also to fit in with the overall aesthetic. So, I do give it dramatic license. It's just that I wish they looked a little bit older and the style was a little more realistic. But again, that's just my own personal preference. It's more of a quibble. I think that really comes across here when the boys find the piece of wig. The style works, but it's just that the boys look extremely young in some of these artworks. Here is the rear cover in the book, as it is indeed the boys going up the stairs of the spooky tower mansion. Then you get the image of the boys finding the treasure, which is used on the front end papers. But what really convinced me to pick this up, the magic touch, I think, is that one of the illustrations is of one of everybody's favorite scenes from the original text, which is when the boys start a fire to distract the local bumbling police, so their father, the famous Detective Fenton Hardy, can actually get to question a dying criminal. And you've got the sort of stereotypical stock Italian grocer character freaking out because there's a fire. And the artist has actually done this as one of the pieces. So this has never truly been done at this level of detail before. And when I was flipping through this and saw this image, that was when I knew for sure I had to pick this up for my collection, because I was so happy that this was one of the moments they chose to illustrate. Then we go right into House on the Cliff, again with nice opening illustration and others with the same matching art style throughout. I'm not going to show every artwork, so that way it doesn't spoil the book for you, but I think the art style does grow on you. I think some like this are even more stylized and actually work really well, even though the boys do still look much more like kids as opposed to teenagers. But still, it's a really wonderful touch that all of these have artwork throughout. Then you've got to jump to the back to get to Secret of the Old Mill. So here is page 1 with the front piece artwork. Then you jump backwards to get to book 4, The Missing Chums. And then here is page 1 with the front piece artwork. Again, I'll also mention the binding as you're going along. It's perfectly fine as a reading experience so long as you're careful, but you can definitely see it's not fully glued in or anything, and you've got basically separate little bunches of pages in the binding, and then they all kind of lay on top of each other. So every once in a while you hit that in between, and you can actually see the sewn binding there, or you can at least see the thread running through. So you will definitely want to be careful when you're reading this, as if you were too rough on it, it might come apart. But again, it is a cheaper book. It's not pretending to be an archival volume, so it's not got the highest quality in terms of the printing and binding. So again, you'll just want to be careful with this. It is sturdy enough that even a kid can read this, but it's also a nicer printed on hardcover, so it's a book you'll want to keep on the shelf and have, and obviously not be taking around everywhere with you where it gets beat up. Now, I haven't read this 100% through, but I have made sure to check portions of each book. I have not noticed any typos or issues with the text, so it seems like it's perfectly fine. That is a particular issue you do have to think about with any public domain text being reprinted, and due to all the different editions we've seen, that was something I was interested to find out. I will read this 100% through at some point, but for now I haven't detected any major text issues. Overall, at $15, which is what it's currently selling for at Barnes & Noble, this is absolutely incredible because you're getting all 4 of the first 4 original texts in a rather lovely hardcover edition where you can tell people really put in some effort. The printing is lovely. The artwork is very stylized and matching, and it's all brand new, unique artwork. I may not be a giant fan of the style and the boys looking a little bit more childish, but everything in this works. And you get the feeling that people put some real care and effort into this. So I think this is easily the best value of any Hardy Boys reprint of the original text that we've seen since they started hitting the public domain. And especially if you've got any Barnes & Noble rewards credit like I did, this only cost me $10. So I couldn't resist because I had a $5 off coupon essentially. The artwork really swayed me, and I really wanted to check this out in more detail because I think this will become my most recommended version for people to check out a physical edition, simply because the value for money is certainly there, and you get the lovely artwork for not just one, not two, but the first 4 original texts. And if you compare this to the most common version that's out there, which is the Dover Thrift editions with the super generic artwork, this was rushed out as soon as the Tower Treasure hit public domain. As you can see, the art is really generic. There's a generic logo on the top. There's a super generic spine, and it's just a small paperback. It's very straightforward. It's fine for what it is, I guess, but there's nothing special about it other than getting a solid, straightforward, decently printed paperback copy of the now public domain text. There's no internal illustrations, nothing special about this release at all, and this retails for $8.99. So already you've mostly paid for this volume with just one of these Dover editions. And again, some of the Dover editions somehow used the 50s and 60s revised texts, which are still under copyright. So I don't know if they ever got in trouble for that, but if you pick up the Dover version of House on the Cliff, it's the 1959 revised version. It's not the public domain original text. So that is, I think, a big indicator of why this new volume is so important and why it's such an incredible value. Now, I don't know how long the $15 price will be in effect, as the sticker on the back indicates the list price for this is $29.99. So if you get this later or at another store, you're probably going to be paying list price. So while it's $15, this is a no-brainer, and it's definitely the most handsome standard version of the public domain original text I've seen. There are some really lovely fancier editions out there from independent publishers. Passage Press has some hardcover editions that are sold in box sets of 3 books each. Those are really impressive looking, but they are rather pricey. I think they're on average $75 or so for each of the 3 books, and they're doing them as they hit the public domain. There's also the really lovely looking editions from Armchair Fiction that are paperbacks, but they also use some original art for the cover that's nicely reproduced. Typically those are using the artworks from the later printings in the 40s and 50s, but they've been doing the books as they hit public domain, and they've also started doing Nancy Drew books. So those are another great option if you want paperbacks and something that's not as expensive as the Passage Press version. Those are really the only 2 physical editions of note, I think. But this, I think, makes the 3rd because it's a wonderful package. It's got great new artwork for all 4 books, and the value is incredible. The only trade-off is it's a value hardcover, so you just want to be careful reading it because that binding is a bit loose and it's not, obviously fancy. So you do get incredible value for money, but just keep this on the shelf, read it at home. But at the same time, kids can still read this, and that's what I hope this volume does, is that it reaches new generations and also gets the original text out there more. But you can definitely feel the love and care that went into this. And what's really great is I think they're going to be doing a Nancy Drew volume later this year with the first 4 books, and hopefully it's in the same matching style so you can have matching volumes on the shelf. Ultimately, I don't think any edition is going to supplant the beautiful Applewood replicas from the 1990s that I have here behind me. These were replicas of the original first editions with the original artwork and white spines, and of course hardcovers replicating the original text and the front piece artwork. They're still the gold standard for replicas and reprints, but unfortunately they only got to do the first 16 books, and it's very difficult to get all 16 Applewoods as the later books were only done in small print runs, and they become very expensive on the collector's market. So you can sometimes piece together the first couple books like I have, but even those are getting harder and harder to find, and will usually cost you quite a bit to get good condition copies like these I have here. But after book 5, they start to get harder to find, and after book 10, books 11 through 16 especially, you're going to be paying upwards of sometimes hundreds of dollars per replica volume. You can still find the original text in older vintage editions, but that of course requires patience and getting good condition, and also figuring out which edition or printing you want. And some books were rewritten much more quickly than others, so they are harder to find in good original text editions. So having a really solid, well done, well cared for edition of the original text is really important. So that's why I wanted to talk about this version, which I was just completely surprised even existed, let alone it had lovely artwork throughout that matched the beautiful printing on the cover, and it's a hardcover version. And it's not one, but 4 original texts and a hardcover for only $15. So I think this should be on every book list or holiday wish list. And if you're looking for getting gifts, especially for kids, there's nothing like giving them a Hardy Boys book to open them to a world of reading and adventure and critical thinking, and also humor and mystery and all the classic elements of the series that have made it a touchstone for generations since 1927. We are approaching the 100th year anniversary since the publication of the Tower Treasure. So what better time than just around the centennial of the characters to embrace the world of the Hardy Boys series. So those are my thoughts on this new edition from Page Publications that is being sold through Barnes & Noble. I'll have links to this in the description below if you're interested. And it's really the nicest affordable edition of Hardy Boys material I've seen in really since the Applewoods. It's very well done, very well put together, and I wish the other public domain publication versions were at least half as good as this. So this is now, I think, my most recommended version because you get fantastic value for money. You'll just want to be more careful in reading it simply due to the binding. But other than that, and the artwork looking a little bit more skewed towards a younger readership, I think this is a lovely edition. I'd recommend it to anyone, and it's currently being sold for only $15 at Barnes & Noble. So do yourself a favor if you're at all interested in the series, or if you're a collector, stop by your local Barnes & Noble, look at it in person in the store, and see about maybe adding it to your library. So as always, I hope my babblings about the magical world of the Hardy Boys and collecting Hardy Boys editions has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you're at all interested, definitely check this edition out, as it really has been made well for the price point and is an incredible value for money. So definitely keep supporting your local bookstores by hopefully being able to add some lovely Hardy Boys editions to your own collection. Keep reading Hardy Boys books, and thank you ever so much for watching.